Yo, what's up everyone? My name is Zenitsu, and we are back with another Digimon video. So today I am going to be doing a meta report, except this meta report is going to be a little bit different than some of my previous meta reports because I usually only like doing these meta reports when we have like a big regional data to look at or multiple regional datas to look at. So that way we could really paint a more accurate picture of how this format is shaping up and the direction that it's going. But right now we don't really have that type of a data, so we're just going to have to make do with what we have, and we do have three medium-sized events that are pretty comparable to store regionals level-sized events, which I know are just coming up, so you could use this to try to help prepare for those store regionals if you're going to be playing in them. So before we get into the nitty-gritty of this video, if you're enjoying this type of content and you want to see more, you already know what to do with the whole YouTube and social media doobly-doo thing, and leave that like, follow, and subscribe, as well as ring that notification bell so you can stay up to date for when I upload or go live next. So let's start off with the Phoenix Reborn event. So I know it says it's EX10, but in the article it says it actually is a BT23 event, and I know based on the date, it's pretty much at the very start of BT23. So usually when it comes to how new formats come in, it's probably safer just to play something that has been good in the last format that you're comfortable and familiar with. Coming off of the last format, it looks like a lot of the top four runners from last format are sticking around for this format as well. Because out of their top 8, we have 2 purple hybrids, 2 Gallantmons, 1 Rocks and Minerals, 1 Machinedramon, 1 Mastymon, and 1 Royal Knights. So when it comes to Royal Knights, yes, Royal Knights of the Purge was limited to 1, but it looks like to make up for that, they're just going to be running the new Yggdrasil to fill in those missing slots. Then when it comes to some of the other new inclusions for this deck, they are going to be running Eater Bit just to be able to have a really good cheap card to remove the opponent's floodgates that would potentially be doing you some pretty devastating harm because the deck doesn't really have that many ways to play around specific floodgates. So this is a really good removal card to actually answer those types of questions while being a levelless Digimon, so it has a higher chance of sticking around, and you could actually do some chip damage with this Digimon. So it's just probably one of the better removal techs that this deck actually can utilize. Then they're going to be using the new Magnamon because it's basically just like the old Magnamon but a little bit better. They're going to be using the new Gallantmon because the new Gallantmon's a really powerful floodgate against the opponent's trash-based strategies and buy you some extra time so you can get into your win condition a little bit easier. Then when it comes to just some other good control tools, you have the new Dynasmon and the new Craniumon that are both here to mostly stall. If you're able to get Rush and actually swing with your Dynasmon, then he actually is a pretty decent Digimon to want to utilize because he'll give himself Security Tech Plus, and then he also could potentially heal you, so that's already pretty decent, but they're both more just stall and control tools because this is one of the best, if not the best, control-based deck in the current game. And when it comes to the last new inclusion, that's going to be the new Examon because it actually has the ability to interact with the opponent's delayed based options, which are pretty uninteractable outside of like literally just Justimon and this. So interacting with something that hasn't been interactable before is going to be incredibly powerful. Plus, it could also remove Tamers and Digimon as well, so it's just another really strong control tool for the deck to utilize. But outside of those, the deck is still the same, the game plan is still the same, and it's just a very strong and oppressive deck. Then when it comes to the 7th place deck, I'm not exactly going to go over all of the nitty-gritties. I'm just pointing out some of the changes that are happening with some of these decks. So Gallantmon is obviously going to want to use its new Gallantmon because, again, hosing on trash-based strategies, which is a very large portion of the game, is what's making this card a very strong card, on top of the fact that it has Gallantmon in its name. So it's just a very easy auto-include into pretty much any Gallantmon deck. Then when it comes to 6th place, it's going to be the Purple Hybrids deck. Nothing really to talk about here, it's just Purple Hybrids. Then 5th place, we see Gallantmon again, and the list is a little bit different, and you could still see that the only real new tech card that they're including is going to be the new Gallantmon. Then when it comes to the other purple hybrid deck in 4th place, it's again just purple hybrids, nothing really crazy here to talk about. And 3rd place, we actually do have Mastimon. So Mastimon is a very interesting deck because it hasn't really had that great of competitive success before, and it looks like the inclusion of the CS Mastimon, even though this player is electing to use only one of it, is going to be good enough because the promo is going to be the main Mastimon that they want to use, and they're also supplementing their Masties with the Masty Ace because you always have to play those mind games of, do I have the ace or do I not have the ace? Because the new Mastimon does have partition, so if it gets removed outside of battle, then it could spit out 2 bodies, which could line up a very easy ace play. So that's pretty strong and cool there, but this Mastimon deck is more specifically trying to take advantage of a yellow core, where it's utilizing abilities that are going to be activating for trashing your security to be able to gain more benefit. So that's kind of the little angle that they're spinning. And then they just have a slew of other floodgates that they're going to be running, as well as the Patamon. Then they're just going to be running mostly Mirais with a little support from TK for some extra consistency. So all in all, not bad. Don't know if this is actually going to perform as well as it might seem, but maybe there's going to be enough creativity to go around in terms of the different ways that we could approach playing Mastimon to be able to actually make it have legs and be a good meta forerunner. Then when it comes to the finalist deck, so 2nd place, it is the Machinedramon deck, and yeah, it's just Machinedramon. The only real noticeable difference is the fact that they're going to be teching in Congo, and they're also teching in Justimon Ace. So yeah, it looks like hosing on delayed based options, which most of the time a lot of decks just want to sit and set up and then wait for the proper opportunity to be able to pop them all and then kind of just win the game from there. Disrupting that is going to be a very good and powerful thing to do. Then when it came to the actual winning deck, it was Rocks and Minerals. So Rocks and Minerals is one of the best OTK decks in the entire game. No surprise, it actually won the event. This player is doing some really interesting things with their Rocks and Minerals builds because they actually are doing the whole combo pair where you could either OTK on your level 6 or you could OTK on your level 7. And if you have both, then they probably should be dead, especially if you have enough memory to be able to do everything you want and need to do. Then, as far as some of the other tech cards that this player is electing to use, obviously they have a Floodgate to try to hose on something like Royal Knights. Then they also are going to be using Invisimon because it is a Black Liberator traded Digimon, so there's some just natural synergy built in. Plus, if you're able to use the Pyramidimon, the old one, then you could swing with your Invisimon, then de-digivolve yourself into a level 5. If your level 5 boosted itself, then it should be able to live through security, and if it does, then you get to obviously go up into the level 6 to be able to unsuspend and continue the aggression that way. So it's a pretty cute tech card, and it's good for not only just the recovery, but being able to have some additional playlines that the deck really wasn't thinking about adopting, because the core strategy of the deck is just to OTK the opponent, so you don't necessarily need these additional playlines, but sometimes they can help. So this event, you could find all of the data, and I'll link it down in the description below for the limitless listings, so you could kind of see how this event played out, what the pairings were, and some of the other decks that were being played. And hopping over onto the English side of things, we do have 2 Eagle's Nest events to look at. One was on the 27th, and one was on the 3rd. So cool that we actually do have more data to look at, even though this data probably is going to be skewed because of samey players doing relatively well, on top of the fact that if you actually look at the pie charts, there's really not a whole lot of difference between them. You see Jesmon kind of eating a little bit more of the Royal Knight pie, but pretty much Hoodiemon and Mastimon are still in here. So it's cool that these decks are doing well. And obviously, based on the Argentina event from Phoenix Reborn, we do have some of the older decks that are also still able to exist. So again, for both of these events, I will link the Limitless page down in the description below, as well as the Eggman event page if you really want to look at that. So we do have to keep in mind that the 27th event was a best of 1, whereas the event that happened on the 3rd was a best of 3, so some data might be a little bit skewed when it comes to that, but it's still a decent amount of games, decent amount of players, and round count. So as far as this event, it was won by Jessmon. I'm talking more specifically the event that happened on the 27th. Then we had Hoodie, Royal Knights, Hoodie, Royal Knights, Mastimon, Hoodie, and Royal Knights. So you could see that between some of the players, if we just hop over to the event that happened on the 3rd, like Tessero, just as an example, I know he's a really good player. He's a repeat in the top performances, so that, again, is going to cause a little bit of that skewed. So you could kind of just take a lot of the two events with a grain of salt when it comes to some of the representation, because you are going to have a lot of similar players make it into the top just because it's more of that community. So I'm not going to go too deep into a lot of the repeats because obviously they're repeats. I'm really not expecting a lot of the CS Hoodiemon deck to be that much different from each other. But when it comes to Jessmon, it looks like this player on that date decided to go with kind of like a hybrid Jessmon deck, because you don't necessarily need to run the Genkumon package and you could just buffer out some of your other ratios. But the idea is you're just going to get into this Jessmon and then he's going to create a large field. And with that large field, it makes sense that Genkumon would obviously be a good card to protect such a large field. And you could do this pretty quickly because you do have the flexibility of digivolving or hard playing the Savior Huckmon from BT20 to kind of just enable everything. Then you do have your delayed options, which is basically going to be your tamers for the deck to be able to not only just act as good consistency pieces, but make sure that your combos are actually going to combo. So it's just a very strong deck with a lot of toolboxing potential. Then when it comes to, let's just take a look at one of the Hoodiemon decks, because there's going to be some minor differences between how Hoodie is going to be played. Most of it, at the end of the day, is just going to be Hoodie Loop, which is just going to abuse the BT22 cards to be able to de-digivolve yourself, so that way you could constantly reuse your level 5 Digimon to DNA into new bodies, because your Hoodiemon is going to interact with Chitose as the main tamer for the deck, so that way Hoodie can just replay the Chitose can replay level 4 Digimon, and hey look, you have 2 Digimon to then DNA with. That's where these cards are going to be coming in handy, so that way you could de-digivolve from the DNA, go back into a Hoodie, and then swing with your Hoodie and basically do the whole thing all over again. So it's just aggressing with your Hoodiemon and then playing out your Chitoses and lining up multiple instances of DNA over and over again. So that's kind of like the core crux of the deck, and I'm, again, not really expecting a whole lot of changes. Obviously, certain card ratios are going to be changed here and there, but the core strategy of what Hoodiemon is doing is essentially just another OTK deck. Then when it comes to another iteration of Royal Knights, again, it's just leveraging a lot of its new tech to be able to help with its overall strategy. So you'll see a lot of things in common as what you just saw. So there's the Magnamon, there's the Gallantmon, there's the Craniamon, there's the Dynasmon, there's the King Yggdrasil. So it's just, again, a lot of the same stuff. It's just some of the other minor tech cards that is going to be what's really defining the differences between them. So you could run Marcus and Crimson Blaze as your removal instead of Eat or Bit. You have some other anti-tempo tools in the form of Digimon Emperor and Hukoto. So you do have some flexibility when it comes to how you're going to be playing the deck, but at the end of the day, it's still mostly just Royal Knights. You're just going to be hard playing your Digimon, trying to control the opponent's field and stalling long enough so that way you could either get into one of your 2 Omnimon win conditions, depending on which one comes first. And then when it comes to this iteration of Mastimon, I'm more specifically talking about the 27th. So all of the decks that you've seen were from the 27th when it comes to the 2 Eagle's Nest events. This Mastimon is still using a yellow base because, you know, Patamon is just an absolutely broken card being able to potentially Digivolve for free. And the difference we see here between this player and the Argentina player at Phoenix Reborn is the fact that they're kind of leaning heavier into Tribal Gatomon. And you're still just going to be obviously running a whole bunch of Angelomons and Lady Devimons. You're still going to be playing the 3 good Mastimons, Promo being the best one, so that's the one you're going to be focusing on the most, while the CS one and the Ace are in here more so for support cards. Your level 7's flexible. This player's obviously using Shine Greymon Ruin mode because why not just Ruin mode? They also are going to be supplementing a Medieval Galamon because, again, this card is just so strong and it can be ran in virtually anything that it just does not matter. Even if it doesn't really color code very well with the deck, it's just that oppressive of a card. Then you have your Mirais and your TK. All right, so taking a look at the third event, which was the Eagle's Nest that happened on the 3rd, we could see that, obviously, I already showed you that the pie charts are pretty similar. There's obviously going to be a lot of similar players because it's the same community. So the same decks doing the same with the same players in the same community, it's not really that big of a surprise. So as far as what won this event, it was a Hoodiemon deck, followed by a Hoodiemon deck. Then in 3rd place was Royal Knights, followed by 2 Jessmons, then a Royal Knights, Mastimon, and a Hoodiemon deck in the close. So again, I'll have the link to not only just the event pages, but the Limitless pages as well, so you can kind of see all of the information for yourself. So as far as the big takeaways, because I'm really not going to be covering these decks because they're mostly going to be the same. I mean, like, you could say that, oh, but what are the different techs between all of the different Royal Knights? And it's just like, it's Royal Knights. It doesn't really matter. I mean, it does, but it's more matchup specific in terms of how it matters rather than like what the techs are doing themselves, because essentially the techs are going to be covering, for the most part, the same types of stuff. And then when it comes to Hoodie, I know there's like 3 variants that you could play Hoodie. You could play more traditional Hoodie, or you could just play Hoodie loops, or you could play Hoodie with some options. So like those are the 3 big ways that you could play Hoodie. And similarly to Jessmon, you could play Jessmon with a splash of Genku or Genku with a splash of Jessmon. It's for the most part almost the same deck at this point, just because like the new Jessmon and the way that you're going to be approaching and how you're going to be playing it is mostly the same. And then Mastimon, as we saw, the really only difference was the level 4s in terms of what level 4s you're going to be using. You can make the argument the level 3s, if you're not using Floodgates, you could just use other utility level 3s to be able to accomplish what the deck is trying to set out to do, which is just get into Mastimon and try to sit and control the game from a Mastimon and have easy ways to go back up into Mastimon. And then you could obviously, like, with Mastimon, add in a couple of, like, utility options if you had the space for, so either, like, a 2-color memory boost or a removal option. It's just up to you, but the cores of all of these decks are, for the most part, the exact same in terms of how they're going to be playing out. It's just minor tech differences. That's why I'm not really going to be, like, super hung up going over them, and that's why it'll be in the description so you could go over it. But for a competitive player, to me, what does this actually mean? So what this means to me, because I kind of do keep track of where the formats are, so obviously this is where the format we're coming from ended up off at. So as far as the big forerunners that are going to be probably transitioning over into this format, we had Gallantmon, Machinedramon, Rocks and Minerals, Growloop decks, Omnimon, Genkumon, Galaxy, and Purple Hybrids. And as we already are seeing, some of these decks are still having success. So like Rocks and Minerals, Machinedramon, Gallantmon, and Genkumon, which is, I guess, just adopted into Jessmon, as well as Purple Hybrids, all already are still doing good. When it comes to like where this format is transitioning into, as far as the little bit of data that we do have from all of these events, this is including like the Chinese event that I already covered last meta report. We do have Hoodiemon basically having a very strong overperformance, as well as Royal Knights having some very strong showing in overperformance. Then you have Gallantmon, Jessmon, and Mastimon and Purple Hybrid kind of just maintaining a status quo. And you could see that a lot of the decks that were doing well are still doing well. And you have Hoodie and Royal Knights and arguably Jessmon kind of starting to overperform. Just because the new tools that they got are just really egregiously strong in terms of enhancing their overall gameplay. So like Jessmon, as an example, can spawn like 3 to 4 bodies, deal 3 checks as early as like turn 2. And if the opponent literally doesn't respond to that, then they kind of just automatically lose the game. Or you could just play like a more tempo-styled Jessmon, where you just have a big explosive turn that, again, leads into a lot of bodies being played and the opponent not really being able to fight back because you could leverage Genkumon to protect your whole field. Then when it comes to Gallantmon, he has a floodgate to start hosing on decks that are going to try to utilize their trash, which is a lot of decks in the entire game. So he's already just one of the stronger decks, and he just literally got a little tiny boost, but the boost is strong enough to keep some relevance to him. And then Royal Knights definitely got a huge boost with all of the different Royal Knights, so you have more toolboxing potential in terms of some of your other Royal Knights that you're going to be running. But the fact that it is a control deck and it has better control tools while being able to replace the card that literally helped nerf the deck in terms of the limitations proves that it really desperately needed those limitations, and if anything, it might even need more limitations. Speaking of a deck that needs limitations, we have Hoodiemon basically being one of the most egregious forms of power creep because of unintended card design, because I'm 90% sure they didn't think about how de-digivolve works when it comes to de-digivolving yourself. So it's just abusing the DNA mechanic to be able to basically reset itself and get some extra swings in for basically no real additional cost to the deck. Because you're not actually swinging with your level 5s half the time unless you're using Pyildramon. You are mostly just using your DNA to reset the state of your Hoodiemon, basically acting as a free unsuspend for doing something that the deck is already doing. But this might end up being the new big OTK deck, but it doesn't mean that something like Minerals isn't a good OTK deck either. It just means that there's probably more popularity on Hoodiemon being an OTK deck because it might be more consistent and might be faster than what Rocks and Minerals is doing, but Rocks and Minerals is still going to be good. Same thing with like the control of Machinedramon. It didn't really feel like it got any worse. It's just the attention is currently on the newer decks, which is not really that much of a surprise, but considering the newer decks are mostly just updates to decks we were already playing and decks that were already doing well, means that those decks are going to be even more powerful than what they already were, and as we could already see, they were already pretty strong. So I think BT23 is probably going to lead to a little bit of a consolidation in terms of how the meta is actually going to play out. I think based on the overall strength of what Hoodiemon threatens, as well as the pairing of Royal Knights, those are going to do some real, not really damage, but real consolidation in terms of what's able to win in a high-level competitive event and landscape. So obviously we don't really have any big concrete data to like formulate and add, so this is all just pure speculation on my part based on the little bits of information that we have. So I would take all of this with a grain of salt and kind of make your own assumptions based on the data that you kind of can see here and infer for yourself. So that's all I really have for this video. Thank you everyone for making it to the end, and I hope you found this to be enjoyable and somewhat educational, and I hope to see you all in the next video. Later.